Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today I'm pleased to welcome a Hollywood veteran. His career as a television comedy writer and producer earned him multiple Emmy and Golden Globe nominations. His work on TV shows, including Bosom Buddies, Growing Pains, Sabrina, The Teenage Witch, Coach, and especially Home Improvement, where he served as executive producer and showrunner, has earned People's Choice, Kids' Choice, and Environmental Media Awards. And if that weren't enough, he's written two highly acclaimed novels and produced a fascinating book entitled The Way We Work: On the Job in Hollywood, giving the inside story of what it's like to work in the trenches of the film and TV industry. Our guest is the multi-talented Bruce Ferber. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Harvey. Pleasure to be here.
Bruce, your book, The Way We Work: On the Job in Hollywood, absolutely captivated me because it defines the Hollywood experience like no other book I've ever read. It's an anthology of 41 short essays from award-winning screenwriters, directors, producers, people behind the scenes about how they got where they are, what it takes to be a success in the business, and what they really think of show business. How did you get these highly accomplished people to open up and basically give you a mini version of their memoirs?
Well, it took a lot of cajoling, and I don't think any of them really believed that the book was actually going to come out or anything like that. So when I told them that it was really because the whole book process, when you go the traditional publishing route, it takes about a year and a half at the minimum to go from finished draft even to it coming out. So when I came out, they were actually delighted to see it come out in the stores and online, which was great.
Well, obviously, anyone who aspires to break into any aspect of show business should read this book, and I'm sure it's required reading at film schools. But I have to tell you, Bruce, even if you're not in the business, the book is such an eye-opener. One writer had to add a part in the script so the star's son could be in the show. Another time, he had to dumb down the dialogue because the star couldn't possibly memorize all those lines.
Right.
One director wrote about making a movie called The Borrower that was absolutely jaw-dropping. And then there's a shocking story about Walter Matthau trying to stab his best friend in the back. Were you surprised by some of the stories you got?
I wasn't surprised by any of it because when you work in the business, nothing surprises you. Nothing surprises you. And back to your other question, one of the interesting parts of the book, or I think one of the unusual parts of the book, is that I asked people to be a part of it who are normally not asked, the below the line people. So their attitude was like, wow, I can't believe I'm being asked to be in a book and I'm not a writer and all these kinds of things. So the way I did it was the book is a combination of interviews and essays. So even though the below the line person seems like they're writing an essay, they're actually answering my questions online. So I made it easy for them. If they said, I'm not a writer, I can't do this. Then there was another guy, one of the essays in the book was written by an assistant director, associate producer, who is considered, I guess is considered below the line, is not considered a writer by any stretch of imagination. And he said, I can write and I'd love to write an essay. And he was the person who wrote the essay on working on the Gene Wilder movie about the Orthodox rabbi in the Wild West. But this guy, who was not by trade a writer, wrote a fantastic essay about working on this movie and being the only Jewish authority in the middle of Colorado who had to advise the director and Gene Wilder on how to act Jewish, even though Gene Wilder was Jewish. He was playing an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. Yeah, it was called the Yeshiva Gopher because he was the lowest level guy on the set, and suddenly he was elevated to being in the star's dressing room, and it's a very funny essay.
Yeah, it really is. One theme that runs through the book consistently is how unglamorous, brutal, and fiercely competitive the business is. Even the cover of the book has a gritty photo that sends a strong message. Almost every contributor said that in order to succeed, you need much more than talent and skill. You need enormous ambition and drive and a very thick skin and a lot of luck. Do you agree with that personally?
100%, 100%. I've seen it, and sometimes you can have the talent, the drive, a very thick skin, but you need that one moment of luck, that one coming together of everything. And for me, that was Home Improvement. That was, I had worked on a lot of shows before I got to Home Improvement, and each show was fraught with all this infighting, politics, difficult stars, whatever. I got to Home Improvement, and even when I joined in the third season. It was kind of a well-oiled machine, and the people who ran the show kind of knew how to deal with the stars, and it was a fantastic experience.
Many of the stories in the book are of very frustrating experiences with seemingly insurmountable obstacles to overcome when they were paying their dues early on before becoming successful. Do you ever worry that young people reading the book might get discouraged from considering a career in the business? Or do you think it's better that they know what they're in for?
I think they should know what they're in for. And remember, a lot of these people, most of the people who wound up in the book succeeded, ultimately succeeded at what they do. In some ways, it's inspirational.
Well, I want to say to our viewers, I think it's important to note that most of the contributors in Bruce Ferber's book do encourage young people to pursue their dreams, but only if you're really passionate about it, and only if you've got fortitude and stamina, and only if you're prepared to work extremely hard and never give up. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's fair. I also think it's fair to say that since most of the people in the book were fairly accomplished by the time the book came out, that between then and now, things have changed. Between when I came up and most of the people in this book, it's a different business. So you have all these streaming channels and all these avenues for work, but the competition is it's even more astoundingly large. You have more film schools. When I came out of NYU, it was basically NYU, USC, UCLA, and I think SMU in Dallas had a film program. Now, not only does everyone have a film program, everybody can make a movie on their iPhone. So you're competing with a ton of people.
But isn't that ironic? If there are so many more channels, so many more platforms, that must mean that there's so many more jobs.
There are a lot of jobs, but the competition has exploded to a far greater percentage than the jobs, in my opinion. And by the way, people are making films, people are working, and a lot of these people are not making a whole lot of money. These people who make shorts that show them on YouTube, they go into festivals, South by Southwest, they win awards. They're not making very much money at all. So there's two different things. You can make films, you can get all your stuff out there, but will you make a sustainable living at it? That's kind of what's changed.
Another recurring theme in the book is that a lot of opportunities and success in show business depends on who you know. Has it always been that way?
It's always been that way because what happens is that, let's say you're in a film school, you have a posse of people who you work with over and over and over again, and as those people start to rise in the business, you rise with them. They'll lift you up. Now you got to have talent. I think the era of bringing along people just as dead weight who aren't talented, that era is somewhat over. I mean, it still happens, but it's somewhat over. But I just read an article the other day. They're doing a mini series from the novel The Underground Railroad. Barry Jenkins, who did Moonlight, is doing this. And they said he's 41 now. They said he's worked with the same group of people since he started. And I'm assuming he started in his 20s. So
Wow.
people rise up together. And, if everyone is in a group of hardworking, talented people, if you're not the one who breaks big, your best buddy may break big and say, hey, I need an editor on this, and this guy's good, or this woman is great. And, that's how it goes.
You know, the unspoken theme of what you're saying, at least what I'm hearing, if I were starting out, is don't make any enemies.
Right. Right. Don't make any enemies until you can afford to. Okay. Once you can afford to, once you're in a position where you can say, this is unfair, I'm talking about with an employer, this is unfair, this is not right. I want to make a stand. Well, you have to be able to back up that stand, and you have to be able to assess the consequences of, if I take this stand, who am I alienating, and is it worth it? Because you can't take every stand. There's so many battles to fight. You got to pick your battles. And once you're in a position to fight, and you have, certainly if you know you have the upper hand, you should fight. And I'll give you an example of this. Back when I was working on home improvement, I had an associate producer on the show, and she was basically involved in post-production. And one day she came into my office. She said, for next season, I'd like you to raise my title to co-producer from associate producer. She said, I don't want any more money. I want that bump in title. And I thought about it. I said, okay, that's a no-brainer. She's fantastic at her job. She'll be a co-producer. I get a call from Disney, the head of production, saying, I hear you want to make this person a co-producer. And I said, yeah, that's true. He said, I think it's a bad idea. And I said, why? He said, it sets a bad precedent. I said, why does it set a bad precedent? He said, well, now everybody will want a title bump. And I said, but we don't have to give everybody a title bump, just the people we think deserve it. And he said, well, I think it's really not good. I don't think you should do it. It sets a bad precedent. And I said, but she's not asking for any more money, because these people are usually all about the bottom line. He said, yeah, but it sets a bad precedent. And this went on and on and on. And I had to be back in the writer's room working. And finally I said, just tell me the truth. Whose decision is this? Yours, the studio's, or mine? And there was a pause. And he said, it's your decision. And I said, okay, she's a co-producer. And he said, I really think it's a bad precedent. And I said, I'm okay with that. And that was that. You take a stand, and especially you take a stand for other people when it costs you nothing. That's what I learned. When you're in a position to do something good for somebody else and they deserve it, do it. Stick your neck out. It's worth it.
That's for sure. Chris Rock and Gabrielle Union wrote a very passionate essay about the inequities and historic lack of diverse casting. They explain why it's so hard for Black actors to get roles. You referred to it in your book as the legacy of exclusion. Do you think things have improved at all for people of color in the industry?
I think they're definitely improving. I really do. Because you see so many. I mean, I'm not saying that it's completely fixed, but you see so many shows with Black casts. Blackish has like 2 spin-offs, or it's had 3 spin-offs. There's so much great programming there. Like I just mentioned, this Underground Railroad is fantastic. Somebody like Jordan Peele is now an empire unto himself. So you have so many Black content creators who are out there helping this happen, and it is happening. It's not as quick as some people would like, but it is happening.
I know it wouldn't be fair to ask you to choose a favorite essay in the book, but can I tell you a few of mine and get your reaction?
Sure, sure.
I love the piece by Billy Van Zant, who was a huge Lucille Ball fan. He wrote about getting to watch Lucy rehearse on the set of her last TV show and then getting a bit part on the show. I loved it because he got to live every fan's dream.
Yeah, it's a great essay, and I'm going to go you one better for telling me that. Billy had written a memoir, and he gave it to me a long, long time ago, and he'd mentioned so many names, and his lawyer told him he could never get it published. But I remembered it. And when I put this book together, I said, Billy, I want to put that essay that you never published in my book. So I did that, and he was grateful for that. And it inspired him, with my coaching, to go back to his memoir, rewrite it, take the names out. I said, it's going to work if you take the names out. It's going to be fantastic. And Billy did that. And he wrote his memoir, and he'll be a guest on your show if you want him to be. And I'm glad you love that essay.
Oh, please ask him. I'd love to have him come on the show.
Okay.
Another revealing essay was by Rocky Lang, who recently appeared on our show. He wrote about Dustin Hoffman and director Sidney Pollack being at each other's throats on the set of Tootsie. I
right,
have to tell you, Bruce, after reading that essay, I went back and watched the movie and I got a whole new perspective on Dustin Hoffman's performance.
right, right. I mean, it's so revealing. It's so, and he's such an intense guy. I mean, he was known in Hollywood for being intense, but Rocky knew Sidney Pollack well. I knew him not nearly as well. But the one thing everyone would have said about Sidney Pollack is that he was talented, reasonable, easy to work with. I mean, he was a very respected Hollywood director. And the tension between these two, I mean, it was insane when you think about it. And then Dustin got Sidney to do the part of the agent, and Sidney was great at that. I mean, this should have been a marriage made in heaven. But that just goes to show you what goes on. And you could argue that's why the movie's so good. They got the best work out of it. But Sidney Pollack, he was torn up inside, and how must he had he have felt at the end of it. I mean, it just to go through that, it's just life isn't worth it. It's not worth it.
And if you didn't have that essay in your book, none of us would ever know.
That's right. That's right.
I think the most fascinating essay for me was by David A. Newman. I want to read you something he wrote and get your comments. He said, and I quote, "In my opinion, the saddest people are the ones who can't think outside the box because the box is gone now." Was he talking about how hard it is to stay relevant and current in the business?
I think he's talking about how the business is completely different now. Yeah, I mean, you're right, and that those two things are part and parcel. It's hard to stay relevant if you're looking to do things the old way. David was a studio executive. Now he has his own company. He does a lot of online stuff. He's kind of changed with the times. And it's not like you want to sell out and do things that you don't want to do, but basically you can't sit around and bemoan that things aren't like they used to be. And if you feel that strongly about it, you got to go do something else. In some ways, that's not really the total reason I went to writing books, because I don't really think that things have to be like they used to be, but I just felt creatively that I wanted to go into writing books because I was in control.
Bruce, I'd like to ask you some questions about your career in television. You spent many years in writers' rooms on TV shows, and I'm sure you've been through development hell, production hell, casting hell, but through all of that, you wrote comedy. What drives your sense of humor?
The thing, if you have a funny outlook on life, if things just strike you as funny, you know that that's important to you, and you know that that's a part of who you are. My wife and I, basically, we laugh every single day, and we do that because she's not a comedy writer, but she laughs at what I say, and I laugh at her, and it's it's part of who we are. So, and there's so many books on how to write comedy. If you're not funny, you're never going to learn how to write comedy.
Your first job as a showrunner was on Home Improvement. You had overall creative authority and management responsibility for a juggernaut of a show. And you had a reputation for making the writer's room a fun place where the writers were not demoralized like on so many other shows. How did you achieve that, Bruce?
Part of it had to do with I had been on the show for a few years before that, and the showrunner before me had kind of established that, kind of a reasonable template for working the writers' room, and not it was not a mean room or anything like that. And I just realized I think I took it one step further, and I thought it could be even more fun. And so there was just there was a lot of joking around in the room, but when it was time to get to work, we got down to it. And I also knew that we weren't curing cancer. It was something that we should enjoy, and it was really hard work because many times in television, the writers' room will absolutely love a script that they put out, and then on Monday morning when the actors read it at the table, the actors hate it, or the network hates it, or the studio hates it. So all that wonder, so basically the idea was to make ourselves happy, make ourselves laugh, and whatever it was we brought to the table, they would have we had been in the business long enough to know that what we thought wasn't necessarily what they were going to think, but we put out the best product we could. They came, and I used to say that, we spend all this time getting the best script we can to bring to the table on Monday. And then on Monday, the actors, give notes, then the studio, then the network. And so we spend the rest of the week with people telling us what a lousy job we did. And somehow by Friday night, it turns out great.
But your reputation specifically about morale, and I checked this out, you are a great believer in constructive criticism. So if somebody doesn't like a joke, they, instead of slashing it, they would say, well, what if we tried this? What if we did that?
Yeah, well, that's not just me. That's the main rule of the writer's room. What a new writer will do is come into the room and say that joke doesn't work, and then yeah, so what do you got? And very soon they learn, if they have nothing, to shut up. That they need to spend that time thinking about something that's better before they put down the other joke. And even when they're putting down the other joke, the way to do it is not to say that joke sucks, it's to say, how about this? And if the room really roars at the next joke, probably that's the next joke that's going to go in, unless it's just a dirty joke that can't go in, but people get a great laugh out of it anyway, and it keeps the room light.
But that template of being constructive, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, that's very effective in any workplace.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Before we move on to your novels, I have just one more question about screenwriting.
Yeah.
When I read your book, I was struck by the irony that on the one hand, as Robert Towne says, it all starts with the script. Nobody can do anything until you have a good script. But on the other hand, writers are not treated all that well within the industry, and they seem to be totally dispensable. Why?
Okay, this is a very complex question. Writers in television, to some extent, still are not treated that way. Writers, since the beginning of television, were known as the force. So in the old days, before actors got power in television, the writer was absolute king. So if you were the writer of a TV show, you were the one who controlled everybody who got hired. If you're the head writer, executive producer, you had a lot of power, and the networks and studios kowtowed to you. So that was the way television was for a really long time. And then there was a phenomenon, the Cosby Show and Roseanne. That kind of changed the dynamic, where the actor, took charge, was allowed to take charge. And I'm sure you remember the whole history of Roseanne with writers, executive producers. They got fired every year because they had to cozy up to her. She had to be satisfied with these people. And if they didn't toe the line, they were gone. In the old days, the studio and the network would tell the star, you got to put up with the writer because the writer's really good. So it changed a bit. But writers still have some power and respect in television. In features, it's always been the other way around, always. Back to the studio system. You remember that they had writers under contract. The writers would come out, Raymond Chandler, and they'd rewrite these guys. They were interchangeable, and that has been and still is the history of the movie business. So in television now, with its rebirth and peak TV and all that stuff, writers are still very well respected in calling the shots.
I think the greatest movie ever made about screenwriting was Sunset Boulevard. But how realistic is that movie?
I mean, Gloria Swanson there are versions of it, of course, because it's also, I mean, yeah, the Bill Holden character drowned in the pool. You kind of feel his pain for sure, and the Gloria Swanson side of it that exists certainly in different incarnations in the business. People who were stars and cannot give up the idea of stardom. Norma Desmond was an incredible star in her day, and she's still living in this house that is crumbling, whatever, with Eric von Stroheim. But to me, that's preferable to the reality stars who never had any talent to begin with and are hanging on to their fame, just for what? Just for being, you know, a Kardashian. Sorry, I said it. But
No, I think there's a huge difference between being a star and being a celebrity.
yeah, I mean, look at Greta Garbo. I mean, that stuff is just, it's so, that is really interesting to me because she was such a star and then she becomes a hermit, and it's just, it's fascinating. Whereas the modern day of reality stars who can even pay attention.
Okay, can we move on to your novels?
Sure.
I know you left the world of sitcoms to take care of your first wife when she was so sick, but then after she passed away and you had to focus on being a single parent, you never went back to TV. What made you start writing novels?
I needed to get the chance that I didn't get in TV. So because as successful as I was in TV, I never got to do the shows that I wanted to do, my own shows. And I was tired of hearing network notes, and I wanted to do something, succeed or fail, that was from my own voice. And that's what the first novel was. And I didn't even know I could write a novel. I just started writing this character, and I enjoyed writing him so much that I kept writing him, and I got a novel out of it.
Are you at that stage of your life where you pick and choose exactly what you want to do?
I am. And, also, I have to say that when you're used to being in a sitcom room or, running a show with 200 people, and you go from there to sitting by yourself every day, being the sole person responsible for the creative output, it's a huge change. And I always felt that, like, what would be ideal is if I could just go from one to the other, and I've tried to do that. So I have consulted on TV shows, and I'm in the process of developing an animated show now with another producer and writer. This is a writer I worked with on a show. This was a very unsung show. It was called Dan Versus, and the star of this animated show was Curtis Armstrong, who was in Revenge of the Nerds and Moonlighting. And it's a really funny, fantastic show. And this co-creator of that show, Chris Pearson, and I have created an animated sitcom based on a fantastic book of short stories called Dazzle. Dazzle is a dog who he's a misanthropic dog, and that's what our show is about.
You know, Bruce, when I was researching you to prepare for this interview, I really loved the fact that your successful career as a TV writer, where you had to write for somebody else's vision, ultimately gave you the financial security and the freedom to write novels using your own voice and your own vision.
It's such a combination of strange and somewhat powerful things. So, my wife gets sick, she passes away. I need something to do. I have the luxury of being able to sit down and at least creatively get myself back together. And that's what that kind of writing did for me.
You wrote Elevating Overmen in 2012 and Cascade Falls in 2015. Your books have won Indie Awards, gold and bronze prizes. Is it fair to say that your novels are more character driven than plot driven?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
then you know the next question. How much of Ira Overman is you?
There's quite a bit, except Ira Overman never got to a level of success. He is me if I never made it, and he's me if I never had a successful marriage or relationship with my kids, which I do. But there are things in his life that do mirror mine, and it was interesting as I was writing the book. I didn't realize that we had these similarities. I thought I was just writing this schlub of a guy who was funny and based on the circumstance of the book gets into fantastic and wonderful situations that he never imagined. And then as the book went on, I saw parts of our lives intersecting. He is involved with this woman who experiences a death, and he is involved in something like I was involved in. And it was a really great process to kind of watch that all come together. Some of the things that happened in that book did not happen to me. Some of them did. So yeah, I'm in there for sure.
And then we get to Danny Johnson. I'm very intrigued by the Danny Johnson character in Cascade Falls because in your book, The Way We Work, many of the contributors advise people to have a plan B. Just in case your Hollywood dream doesn't work out, have a plan B. Well, Danny does precisely that and is, of course, very unhappy and unfulfilled. So, what's the answer?
The answer is, I guess the answer is to have either a fantastic plan B or, I mean, what people do today. I mean, there's one piece in the book by an actress who works all the time. She and she is she's not an ingenue anymore. She gets hired for mommy roles, maybe, but there's big competition there. And she's very honest when she advises people that unless you're so driven that you feel you have to work in television, have to work in movies, her advice is get your creative stuff out on the side, do community theater. The answer is, Harvey, that you have to get your creativity out somewhere, whether you can get it out, whether you get it out in your day job or how you do it is it's debatable. Nobody knows if they're going to make it or not. But always know that even if you have to take a plan B job that you don't like, to find those little windows to keep being creative, and maybe something will come eventually.
There's a theme that runs through both of your novels, at least for me. Both Ira Overman and Danny Johnson are struggling to figure out what really matters in life. And I kept thinking as I was reading, when you lose your wife and your children lose their mother, no one knows better than you what really matters in life. And I think you've honored her memory so beautifully in these books.
Oh, thank you. I really tried to do that, and it's funny how it it just seeped into both books. In Cascade Falls, where it came in, there is a character who is a widower, and one of the passages in the book is that he is reading all the books his wife used to read and kind of watching some of the TV shows that she liked to sort of get to know her more. And that was something that happened to me. My wife was a great reader, and there are tons of books on my shelves that I haven't even gotten into yet. But there were some books in particular that I started to read, and they were just so powerful. And it was so powerful. I imagined her reading the book as I was reading the book.
That's interesting because I just want to make it clear to our viewers the books are not about Bruce's wife, but the importance of living life to the fullest and healing your pain is so prevalent in both novels.
Yeah, I think so.
Is there any chance that either of your novels will be made into a movie or a series?
Oh my gosh, Overman, we've been trying to sell. Jason Alexander wants to play Overman. He did the audiobook for the novel. But, at the moment, I mean, Jason does a lot of work. But, is anybody going to give him the go ahead to do this? It's debatable. We had a meeting with a major producer, and he wanted to change this and change that. And by the end of the meeting, Jason and I turned to each other and said, "You know what? It's not even the same story anymore. It's not even the same character." We just walked out and said no. And this was one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood.
I was going to ask you what's next for Bruce Ferber, but I
I
know
got
there's the animated series.
No, I got so much stuff going on. Seriously, I have a finished novel that I'm out there trying to sell. which oddly enough also has to do with, what gives one's life meaning. So that one is out there, and that will come out sooner or later. And now I'm writing another one, which I'm almost done with a first draft of, that will take considerably longer to come out. And then I also have a documentary that I'm working on, that I'm developing, that I can't really talk about because I'm waiting for certain people to say yes. Otherwise, if they don't say yes, it won't happen. But anyway, between those four things, I've got a lot. I got plenty to do.
So
You
does
know.
that mean I can get you back on the show 4 times?
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, anytime you want.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, Bruce. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for taking the time to be on our show.
Thank you, Harvey. I really enjoyed it.
Our guest has been renowned Hollywood writer, producer, and author Bruce Ferber. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneInterviews.com.